Hey folks, Ray from Rainmaker.com here. Today we've got SRM's newest power meter, the SRM EXAKT pedal-based power meter. So what it is, of course, is a pedal-based power meter, very similar to some of the other options on the market out there, but they partnered with Look to develop this. So you've got a complete Look pedal, and then within that you have the SRM power meter. So essentially taking the Look partnership for the pedal body and the SRM side of the house for the strain gauge and the power meter measurement portion of it. Now you may remember that Look went ahead and actually partnered with Polar back a number of years ago on their pedal-based power meter. Looks pretty darn similar, but there are actually quite a big differences according to the two companies internally. It sounds like they completely reworked the entire internals of it from a power meter standpoint. You also notice the pod is now gone as well. So in the case of the previous Polar and Look partnership, and then eventually Look by themselves, that did have a pod on the side of it. Now the next thing you'll note is that it is dual AMP Plus and Bluetooth Smart, something that the old Polar one wasn't. The interim kind of Look by themselves variant did have that, though it still had the pods. So now with the SRM version, it is dual AMP Plus and Bluetooth Smart. And interestingly, on that Bluetooth Smart portion of it, they've done what is called a Zwift compatibility mode. So one of the challenges that Zwift has on Bluetooth Smart side of things is that it does not support pairing to two different pedals. So in the case of like the Favero Assioma or the PowerTap P1 pedals, you can't pair both pedals at the same time. You choose the left pedal or the right pedal, which means you spent all this money on a power meter and you're only getting one of the data doubled. In the case of Garmin Vector, they channel that through correctly as a single Bluetooth Smart power meter stream, and SRM is doing the same, allowing you to get that total power over Bluetooth Smart. Now, of course, you can still do that via AMP Plus and get total power, and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, but it's something that's kind of unique and a bit interesting to the SRM model. Now, SRM is selling this in three different variants. Number one is the bundle, which is what I have here in my hands, so the left and right pedals with an SRM PC8 head unit. Then they've got the dual setup, which is simply the two pedals, but no head unit. And then they've got the single setup, which is the right master pedal and then a dummy pedal on the left side. So you get still two pedals in that configuration in that single, but only one of them has electronics in it. So therefore, kind of very similar to what you see on virtually every other power meter company out there doing that with pedals, where they have kind of a single, the dual, and then usually some sort of bundle as well for the conclusion of or inclusion of the head unit. Now, from a durability, size, weight, etc. standpoint, the pedal body, the entire thing comes at 155 grams per pedal, basically the same as most of the other options out in the market there, plus or minus a few grams. I'll put those on the bottom, the other options that are out there. So pretty very similar there. It is Ipx7 waterproof, which means you can dunk it in a tank of water 1 meter deep for 30 minutes. Again, pretty much the same as everyone else out there. Look is keeping that stainless steel contact point at the top there, something they're pretty proud of from a durability perspective. And it does have a 2-year warranty on it, which again is kind of the norm for most other brands out there, mainly because of the EU requirement for a 2-year warranty. When it comes to support, Look and SRM have come together. They have kind of a single point of contact for support. And what happens behind the scenes is that after you contact the single point of contact, they will then farm it out to the nearest office, either Look or SRM in your particular country or region. So for example, if you're in France, it's going to go to Look France. If you're in the US, it's going to go to the Colorado Springs office. That's in obviously Colorado, and so on, depending on what country you're in. So there isn't like a single, variant of which side of the company, which side of the house is going to take care of you from a support standpoint. But from a consumer perspective, all you have to know is to go to this sort of dual entity. They have a dedicated support email and all that kind of stuff. And then from there, they take care of you behind the scenes. And the reason why I mention that's kind of important is one of the big criticisms of the past partnership between Polar and Look was that support was a bit of a nightmare. In theory, it was supposed to go through Look, but at the end of the day, like, it took months to get things resolved. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this works in real life for this. I think they've kind of got to prove themselves a little bit after the way things were handled for both the Look and Polar and the Look side of the power meter house back over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, when it comes to mounting this whole kit, you do have a mounting tool inside of it. So there's this tool right here. Now this tool is very similar. In fact, it's exactly the same as what Look used in the past to mount their power meters. In particular, the Polar variant, and then again by themselves. And it was sort of a pain in the butt, but they've improved upon things a little bit here. One is that technically you're supposed to use this, but you don't really have to use this. Instead, what they have is on the pedals themselves, there's little markers there, and this helps you to line it on your crank arm, and then use the app, the phone app, to basically get it within what's called a green zone. No, not like the Baghdad green zone, but like the green zone on this app that allows you to go ahead and see where it fits in there to get the kind of that perfect orientation there. It's a bit different than something like Favero Assioma, Garmin Vector 3, PowerTap P1s, where you can just simply screw them on, tighten them down, you're good to go. SRM says they get better accuracy out of that. I'm not really sure if that's the case. We haven't really seen that be an issue for most other power meters, to be honest, at this point. That's sort of been solved. But nonetheless, with the app, it's pretty straightforward. Having watched the install, it's just simply to go ahead and tighten in place, watch the little gauge on the app itself, and you're good to go. Next, one of the differences you'll notice between the pedals and a crank-based SRM power meter is the fact that there is now both active and passive temperature compensation on the unit. So SRM does not have active temperature compensation on the crank-based units, but they do now have them on the pedals, and that's designed to be a bit of a backstop to the passive temperature compensation on these, which basically goes that has a preset calibration for each different temperature range. So most manufacturers do this, and then it can go ahead and correct the calibration for the temperature compensation at that point in time. The active side of it is to kind of act as this backstop behind the things. Now it'll be interesting to see how that works in real life. That's something that, of course, if I look at all the issues that power meters have across the market, really the three big ones are temperature compensation, humidity, and kind of the accelerometer drift issue on like hard surfaces and stuff like that. And that's something I'll have to test over time. In this case, I've got 2 rides done with it so far. I went out for like an hour and a half or so with just the pedal-based power meter by itself on a bike. So from a data standpoint, that was completely useless. From a ride standpoint, it was nice, but data standpoint, not terribly useful. Then I went back out again for a shorter ride, about a half an hour or so, comparing an existing SRM crank-based power meter alongside of the pedal-based one. And I'll go ahead and I'll put the overlay of that data here and kind of walk through that in just a second. But from a head unit perspective, looking at the 2 head units side by side, they were very, very close, as you would expect. But I still would like to see that, of course, over a much more broad range of environmental conditions, different swings in temperature and stuff like that. That is something that SRM has had some trouble in the past with, especially on long climbs where you don't have any place to reset that zero. So if you go, for example, an hour and a half up d'Huez or something like that, in the past, there wasn't a way for SRM to compensate for that potential temperature drift over the duration of the climb. SRM would say that their power meter and strain gauge design compensates for that natively. In reality, the rest of the world would mostly disagree with that. So hopefully the active side here will solve that, and that's something that SRM said it is coming to their crank-based power meters perhaps later on this year. Finally, one last thing of note here is that on the pedals themselves, there is a small magnet there. Now this is a bit different than other pedal-based power meters that use accelerometers to measure basically the cadence around it, which in turn is how they get power based on the torque. In this case, they've actually got a magnet in there. So as you rotate the spindle, it passes the magnet each time, and it goes ahead and in theory should give you a more accurate cadence value and, more importantly, more accurate power over certain road conditions. Again, it's something that I think, it's certainly a challenge for the power meter industry, but it's not something that in 2018 I tend to see as a big issue for the most part in power meters. Out of all the power meters I've tested in the last 2 to 3 years, like 95% of them succeed on accelerometer-based units. But I suspect this is something that they put in there mostly as a bit of like a marketing pitch that makes it, in theory, more reliable. And yes, magnets are, without question, more reliable at the extreme edges of fringe cases and stuff. But a lot of pro athletes now use power meters with accelerometers in them, and no one's really having any sort of major issues outside of, again, those like 1% edge cases that are pretty darn rare. So the big question you probably have right now is how much is it all going to set you back? So this box that I'm holding right here with the PCA and the dual setup is 2,179 euros. I will toss the US dollar price in the bottom there. Then next, if you have just the pair of pedals themselves, the dual one, that is 1,399 euros. And then finally, if you want just a single pedal with the other side, the dummy pedal, that is 799 euros. That's a tough pitch, not gonna lie. Like at this point, if you look at the dual setup, that's 400 euros more than kind of the competition has that with the Garmin Vector 3 and the PowerTap P1s, which are actually another $200 cheaper than that. In the case of Favero Assioma, that's another 100 and something cheaper than that again. So you're talking like this is twice the cost of Favero Assioma. It's 30% more than the cost of Garmin Vector 3, 40% more than the cost of PowerTap P1, and there's no real like basis for that. From an accuracy standpoint, all 3 of those units, people have said, and I've seen as well, are very, very accurate. They all have their quirks, just like this has its quirks. There's different quirks that manifest themselves in different units. In the case of Garmin Vector 3, it's the whole battery cap fiasco that's going on for some people. In the case of Assioma, it's the fact that you have that little pod piece there that people don't necessarily like from a look standpoint. In the case of PowerTap P1 pedals, it's the chubbiness. In the case of this, it's probably more the installation side of it, and of course, course, the price itself. Still, it's something I'll look at as part of my full in-depth review, probably sometime later on this summer. They're hoping to ship units on July 1st, so just over a month from now, and then that will, of course, be available at that point, and I'll go ahead and start the review process probably in the next couple of weeks here, and then aim to finish it up sometime later on this summer. Anyways, if you found this interesting, go ahead and check out the full post in the description there. I've got a lot more details there, a little more comparison stuff as well to the other 3 pedals on the market, and then of course I'll have more information on the review later in the summer. Don't forget to whack that subscribe button as well, so you stay tuned for the latest sports technology goodness. There's plenty more coming up, especially in the next like 7 days or so, that you'll probably want to not miss. And then also, if you hit the like button if you found this interesting as well, I really appreciate it. Have a good one.